Year 3 has arrived on the Wildlife Homestead, and that means new goals and new projects. This winter, while everything rested under a blanket of snow, I began to build nest boxes. Lots of them. On our property, standing dead trees are few and far between. Without them, many birds and mammals are left searching for shelter that doesn't exist. That's where the nest boxes come in. My goal was to create homes for over 20 species, from owls to songbirds to squirrels. Winter is the perfect time for projects like this. It's usually quiet, which gives me a chance to prepare for the busier seasons ahead. But like any project I do, it doesn't matter which time of the year it is, there's always something to be distracted by. While I was preparing nest box plans, something caught my eye at the trout pond. This was early in the season before the ice had fully formed on the pond, and I spotted an American mink slipping in and out of the water. At first, I thought it was hunting the last few trout in there, but as I got closer, I realized it was diving beneath the surface to hunt hibernating frogs. I wondered if this mink would spend the winter here, but after reviewing the footage, I understood why it wouldn't. I watched it hunt for just over 30 minutes, and in that time it dove underwater 6 times. 5 of those it came up with a frog. That's a pretty high success rate. Mustelids are notorious hunters, and if it really wanted to, this mink could have probably wiped out a good portion of the pond's frog population in just a day or two. Luckily for the remaining frogs, this was the only day I saw the mink. In an earlier video, I mentioned that it was a good year for frogs in this pond since there were only a handful of trout left, so it's interesting to see how nature doesn't waste any time balancing things out. That's one of the things I've been fascinated by since moving here, is seeing how populations fluctuate from year to year. Last winter, our biggest jump in numbers was from the evening grosbeaks that went from a dozen the year before to over 200. This winter, our biggest increase was definitely in red squirrels. The last 2 winters, the most we had around our house was around 8, and this winter we had close to 2 dozen. Of those 2 dozen, there were 2 persistent squirrels that learned how to escape the cold weather by squeezing through some cracks in the potting shed behind our garage. And they started building a nest. I didn't mind them being in there. We don't use that shed during the winter, and it's mostly just shovels and tools, things that they can't really damage. But they were getting into some landscape fabric and string to make their nest. So I wanted to test out if giving them a dedicated box in there would make them less destructive. I had this hollowed piece of poplar laying around. I just widened the inside a bit, then drilled a 2.5-inch entrance hole. I smoothed it out, put a roof on it, and set it up on a table inside the shed. I filled it with grasses, lichen, and shavings, but wanted something a little warmer. Now, I don't want to name names, but somebody in our house likes to steal and rip socks, so I cut them up and left them outside the box. It took a few days for them to get comfortable with the new setup. After finishing up my peace offering of peanuts, they got started on bringing in the socks. I feel like these 2 squirrels lived in luxury. They had a remarkably consistent schedule that they stuck to all winter. Around sunrise, they'd slowly make their way out of bed. Then it's off to the feeders to stock up for the morning. At lunchtime, they'd usually come back inside to check on the box and play around the shed. They'd go back outside to the feeders for the afternoon. And at sunset, they'd be inside the shed, winding down for the long winter night ahead. By nightfall, they were already tucked away inside the warm bundle of socks. Setting up this box worked really well in deterring them from destroying anything inside the shed. Besides a few pine cones they left behind, I don't think I would have been able to tell that they were in here if I didn't have the cameras. By early April, they stopped using this log altogether as the weather warmed up and likely moved into the forest to find a higher, more secluded site to nest. Since the red squirrel population was high this year, I was hopeful that it would mean other rodent populations were high as well, and maybe this could be the year we have our first owl nesting here. For owl boxes, I have the property split in 4 sections, and I alternate between barred owl and saw-whet owl boxes. I built some last year that I finally got around to putting up, and 5 minutes after I put them out, I already had chickadees inspecting them. So I built a handful of boxes for chickadees and nuthatches to give them more appropriately sized nest sites to choose from. I can definitely see why they were checking out the boxes though. The fresh wood really stands out in the forest and it makes them easier to find. I typically don't use any wood preservatives on my raptor boxes to help blend them into the environment. They're just much more sensitive to that type of stuff. But while I was building flying squirrel boxes, I had the idea to use some charcoal from the fireplace to naturally darken the wood. It looked way too dark when I first put it on, but once I wiped it away a bit and put it into the forest, I was really happy with the results. The wood blends in well with our trees, even better than lightly burning the wood, so I'll be using this method for future boxes. One of my main goals for building nests this winter was to focus on a specific group of animals, aerial insectivores. I feel like there's a lot of potential when it comes to aerial insectivores because we already have good habitat for them, it's just a matter of building the structures they need for nesting. There were 6 species that I built boxes for. The first 2 were big brown and little brown bats. I built 1 bat box last year and we didn't get any bats in it, but after doing some more reading, there's 3 potential mistakes that I made that may be the reason it didn't house any bats. First off, I put too many ventilation slots. These slots are more important in places with much warmer climates than ours. For our climate, we need the darkest box possible with fewer places for heat to escape. Just for a frame of reference, bats prefer boxes between 28 to 40 degrees Celsius. This leads into my second mistake, which is at the last minute I decided to tack on this tin to protect the roof, and since it's white, it may be reflecting the sun and some extra heat away from the box. The last mistake was I stained it only a couple of days before I put it out, so it's possible the scent was deterring the bats. To address all of these potential issues, I stained the new boxes months in advance and let them sit outside. They don't have any ventilation slots, and I just left the roof as is. I made 1 box with 1-inch slots for the big brown bats and another box with 3/4-inch slots for the little browns. I set up one by the forest pond, which is where I saw our only bat last year, and that's both sad and exciting. It's sad that we only saw 1, but I mean, hey, it's better than 0, and it gives me a little hope that the bats will find this new box. The second one was set up near the trout pond up front, and I bought a thermometer gun so I'll be able to monitor the temperature in each of these boxes throughout the summer. After finishing the bat boxes, I started building some for tree swallows. Last year we were almost at full occupancy in our swallow and bluebird boxes, so I needed to build more anyways. But this time I wanted to make them wider than my old ones, because tree swallows can lay up to 7 eggs. We've had clutches of 6, and it seemed a little tight, especially with both parents coming in and out. I can't really imagine squeezing another swallow in there. So I wanted to test out slightly larger boxes. This is the size of the floor for the old tree swallow boxes I used to make. And this is the size for the new ones. They're quite a bit bigger, not big enough where they're floating inside, but that should give them extra room if they have a full clutch. The nice thing about tree swallows is they nest here every year, so we should get pretty quick feedback on which boxes they prefer. Unlike the tree swallows that nest here every year, cliff swallows have been one of my top targets since we moved here. But I haven't had any success, so I took the next step in attracting them and ordered some artificial nests from Swallow Conservation. I just got in the artificial cliff swallow nests and they look awesome. These are all handmade, so they're slightly different in terms of like the size and the entrance hole, but they look really good, and I'm hoping that this is the missing piece to having cliff swallows nest here. In the first year they showed up, looked like they were going to nest, but they didn't. Second year, I thought maybe they didn't have a good mud source, so when I built the vernal pond, I just left them some exposed mud on the side. That didn't work, even though they did show up again. So I'm hoping that this is the last kind of ditch effort for me to get them on the property. This saves them probably hundreds and hundreds of visits. If you think just a small mouthful of mud that a cliff swallow can bring, yeah, this is going to save them a lot of time and a lot of energy. So when they do show up and they see these, hopefully all they have to do is pick one that they like, and then they'll just collect a bit of mud and seal off the hole as much as they want. Another swallow species that I've been trying to attract is the barn swallow. The ledges I set up under the lean-to of our garage were successful in attracting phoebes and robins, but still no barn swallows. One reason could be that the ledges I set up are too hidden. The phoebes found them because they hang out low to the ground to hunt, but for a barn swallow flying high overhead, I could see it being hard to tell that the ledges are there. So I installed 3 simple ledges closer to the edge of the lean-to, which should be more visible to barn swallows migrating overhead. Even if this doesn't work, it's not really a big deal, it's just a few pieces of wood screwed together, but the next box I built was a much bigger undertaking. Over the winter, I read this book about building chimney swift towers. Historically, chimney swifts would nest in large, hollow trees in our area, but as those became more and more rare, they started to nest in man-made structures like chimneys, barns, and silos. It's gotten to the point where many swifts associate towns with potential nesting sites, so I figured I'd try building them a 12-foot tower beside our garage. I built a mini model of the chimney swift tower that I want to build. Right now it looks like a little chimney swift tower for ants, but all in all it's going to be 12 to 14 feet tall, and I just wanted to make sure that I had my design down perfectly because this is going to be the biggest box that I've ever built here. The bottom's going to be supported by these 4x4 posts. Underneath, there's plenty of holes for drainage and ventilation. Like I mentioned, these sides here are going to be about 12 feet tall. The top 2 feet are going to be protected by a predator guard, so nothing can get inside the box. And then on the roof, that's the entrance right there. There's going to be a sun collar around it that faces north. That way there's less sun getting into the box, because apparently that's one of the reasons why some of the nests can fail. And the tower itself will be 3 different layers. The exterior is going to be plywood, followed by this 1.5-inch insulation board. And then since we moved here, I've had a bunch of this tongue and groove just sitting around. And this actually works out really well because there's already these grooves inside that I think the chimney swifts can hold on to. But just in case, I don't know if they're deep enough, I'll make some deeper grooves on the top and the bottom as well, just on the table saw. And that'll give them plenty of options to choose from wherever they want to perch. Despite the size of the box, this will only house 1 pair of chimney swifts in the nesting season. That may seem like a big investment for just 1 pair, but the nice thing about swifts is, even after they fledge the nest, they'll still return here every night to roost. And outside of the breeding season, during the migration, we could potentially have dozens or hundreds of swifts using this box for roosting. The one thing I haven't mentioned is that I've never seen or heard a chimney swift here, so this may turn out to be a lot of work for nothing. But how I see it is, before building this I had no places for them, so even if this only slightly increases the chances they nest here, I feel like it's worth it. That's the nice thing about building boxes for species that typically nest in dead trees. Naturally, these cavities don't last forever, so it's in their DNA to always be on the lookout for new nest sites. I have a camera installed in this box. I'm now eagerly waiting for the first notification telling me there's movement in the tower. While I was pulling apart tongue and groove boards for the tower, I found old mud nests that were possibly from mason bees that were sandwiched between the two boards. That gave me the idea to buy and build some mason bee and leafcutter bee trays. Those big insect hotels look nice, but if they're not cleaned out every year or two, they can become overrun with mites and parasites. The bees using them could involuntarily carry pollen mites to nearby flowers where other bees are at risk. So I much rather have these smaller trays that I can space out and clean out every year. I had some leftover soil from digging the hole for the chimney swift tower, so I sorted out all the rocks and gathered the clay. Beside the mason bee trays, I put a small terracotta pot filled with that clay and placed it in a pot with water. The water will wick up and create a moisture gradient, which allows the mason bees to choose the exact texture of mud they want. While I had bees on the brain, I got started on building bumblebee boxes. I read a few studies that bumblebee boxes can be really hit or miss the first year, so I tried casting a wide net by using different woods, sizes, preservatives, entrance holes, and nest materials. Last year we had some that nested in an old red squirrel box, so I tried filling the bumblebee ones with similar materials. I started with a base of wood shavings, then did a mix of either grasses, hay, or more shavings. And for insulation, we've been collecting some of our rabbit's fur every time she sheds. I wanted to get fur from all of our pets to see if there's one that works better than others, but the other pets don't shed as much. I also harvested some cattail heads and used the fluffy seed heads as insulation. I numbered each of the boxes so I'll be able to track which design and materials were the most successful. With the snow almost fully melted, it was crunch time to get the last set of boxes up. There were a couple for northern flickers and a couple for American kestrels, and I finally built one for fishers. Fishers are very secretive, but surprisingly, they're one of the more common species on our trail cameras. A female fisher will use multiple den sites throughout the season to raise her young, which she'll usually have in late winter, so the box had to be warm enough and big enough to fit her and her kits. I built it to be about 3 feet tall, and it had a similar design to the chimney swift tower with insulation boards sandwiched between plywood to keep the temperature stable. I also outlined the entrance with metal plates. Fishers are sexually dimorphic, the males are about twice the size of females, and have been known to raid dens and attack the kits. I'm hoping this entrance size and the metal plates are enough to allow the female to go in and out, but keep the male fisher from forcing his way in. This was the last box I set up for the season. While the warm weather slowly moves in, more and more species are making their way back for the spring. I'll be excited to see how everything from these little pieces of wood to the massive nest boxes can benefit the animals in year 3 on the Wildlife Homestead.